This is Las Doctoras podcast with your favorite profas, Dr. Renee Limas
and Doctora Cristina Rose. Join us as we bring women and gender studies topics out of the university and onto the kitchen table.
Salud! Welcome to Las Doctoras podcast.
Oh, yes. Welcome. Thank you so much. We're very excited to be having this special session together.
Yeah, this is a special session book club. We haven't done a book club meeting in a few years, actually.
Really?
I think so.
Oh my God.
But as soon as we found this book through Chani Nicholas, our favorite astrologer, when you did a live with her, we were like, oh my God, we got to do this.
Yeah.
So, welcome, Deepa.
Mm-hmm.
And if you would introduce yourself.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. And thanks to everyone who's joined and who's taken time to read the book. Looking forward to hearing your feedback and questions. By way of really quick background, my name is Deepa Iyer. I use she, her pronouns, and I live in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. I am an activist and a writer. I've been involved in social justice movements for about 20 years. My community home, my political home is in the Asian American, South Asian, Muslim Arab spaces that I've worked in since September 11th. Through a lot of pivotal moments in this country that have affected those communities in particular. I currently work at a nonprofit called the Building Movement Project, where I curate a project on multiracial solidarity and cross-movement solidarity, which is really vital strategy, especially at a time of depolarization in our country and divisiveness. So that's a little bit about me. I'm happy to share more. I think it's great that you found the information about the book and the framework through Chani's IG Live. She's amazing. And because I think we're even taping this on a full moon, I think today is the full moon.
In Leo.
Oh, in Leo, of course.
Yeah. Chani and I went to the same school. We both went to CIS, the California Institute of Integral Studies. So I don't know if that's how we found her, but I'm trying
to remember, how did we find Chani? But I feel like she spoke our language.
Yeah.
So welcome. I'm like, where do we want to begin? I think that, well, I will say that live that you did with Chani, I think I love Chani. I feel like I trust her, and I trust, kind of the folks that she, surrounds herself with.
Yeah.
And then when she referenced the book, to me, it just clicked so much. And I was like, Christina, we got to get this book. It felt like it clicked so much because we, are women's studies professors, by trade. But we also do a lot of community work, and we're also moms. And so there's always this tendency, and I think you speak to that in the book, right? There's this tendency to, on a normal basis, want to do so much, because we care and we have a passion. And then particularly in moments of crisis, it's like, oh, now we got to do more. And it puts us into
depletion.
Yes. Burnout and so much. And so, and I think over the last couple years, we've been trying to lean into this, we have our purpose. We don't have to do everything. Let's lean into what is our role. So this language of ecosystem and role was yes, that's exactly what we've kind of been looking for. So the framework just made so much sense to us.
I love it.
So there's a lot of things that we're going to kind of maybe, go through and ask you about. And I want to start with something that really resonated with me was the idea of nurturing relationships. And like you said, in a moment of deep polarization, I feel like I've witnessed more divisiveness in this time than I have. I mean, I'm I know I lived through the 2016 election, and like I remember those, and I feel like this has just been to a level that maybe I didn't expect, or a level that
Mm-hmm.
it's just been really difficult. And
2016, COVID, BLM,
like,
like,
I mean, and 9/11 too, right? Like we
yeah,
I was in college when that happened, and so it's just I think it's felt really difficult to kind of like figure out what is our community, how do we nurture those relationships, partially because of the way social media works, right? Like I think you kind of said it a little bit, I don't know if this is a language, but like almost like this false sense of community sometimes, like
yep. Mm-hmm.
do we know each other in real life, do we not, are we really gonna be together? But I just love the idea of like I felt like you were saying the foundation of it all is to like nurture those relationships, because if we don't do that, it makes it that much more difficult to do the work out in the world, because it's
Mm-hmm.
not sustainable if we're doing it by ourselves.
Right, the ego gets involved and we think we can do it all.
Yeah. So I
Mm-hmm.
would love for you to speak to that, right? Like maybe why you feel that that's so important to nurture relationships, and then maybe
In
how
this
we do
moment.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, I'm trying to figure out where to start. I mean, the impetus for the framework in the first place was that, I noticed that for myself and for so many others, that we get caught up in this cycle or the seesaw of either being really outraged or being numb, and feeling at times hopeless. I think you used the word depleted, fatigued. And I think that the layer of unprecedented overlapping crises that are happening around us right now,
Mm, mm,
along with the sort of sense of isolation that a lot of people feel because we don't have the civic spaces and the gathering spaces as much as we used to in
Mm-hmm.
real life, right? To connect. I think that then creates this perfect storm of feeling like we have this burst of energy, this surge of energy in a crisis moment, and then we get exhausted, and then there's another crisis moment, and it just becomes like a
mm,
roller coaster of activism and engagement. So this framework is really a way to think about organizing ourselves in a more self-aware way, in a way that asks the question, what does my ecosystem require of me at this point, rather than what do I gain, right? Or what is it that
mm,
I want to give? Or what is it that I think should be done?
Mm-hmm.
Really asking, what does the ecosystem around me need and require?
mm,
What does this moment require? And then identifying the roles that can actually be brought to that question, to answer that question, and the relationships that need to be present among everybody in that ecosystem
mhm.
that's connecting to shared values, shared goals and outcomes, shared agreements on how people are going to interact with each other and the like. So it's that kind of combination of asking the question of what does the ecosystem require,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then meeting that response in a way that is aligned with our skills and our experiences, and really trying to bring, our aspirational highest selves to the forefront.
I love how you speak to everything coming together. And honestly, I'm really resonating with our ecosystems really having been challenged during the COVID years. And it's making me in this moment, I'm so grateful that our friendship, our relationship has endured through that, and a lot of our community, and yet how far apart we are, and how the local community is something that
Yeah.
we're still like, hey, it's almost like a, curanderismo. We're like, come back, it's safe,
Yeah.
come back together, and that's what's required in this moment, the rebuilding of
Yeah.
the
I
ecosystem.
I
Beautifully
I think
said.
there is a lot of isolation, and it's like we're after COVID, we're trying to figure out how to get back together, kind of, right? Like the communities, they're trying to figure out like how do we rebuild? And then again,
Mhm.
like you said, these moments of crisis. And like this, I like you said, what does the ecosystem require? it's like, man, those are real questions. And I think something that I really like that you touched on too was, some of the questions you asked were like, what ecosystems have you been a part of? And what kind of like what has worked and what hasn't worked? What did you need in those ecosystems? And we've been in different ecosystems where it hasn't gone well. Right.
Listen to episode 15
yeah.
and episode, yeah.
And so I think something I would love to like, I think you kind of speak to like, we have to kind of maybe create infrastructure around like conflict resolution. I think sometimes that's something that is so difficult within an eco where we're like, even when we have similar values, I think you said something, we may not feel like the same pathway to achieve those values, right? Or to get to those values. So like, what do we do in those situations when there's like conflict, and how do we resolve that without resorting to the ego, without resorting to
the call out culture, the
yeah,
cancel culture?
yeah,
Yeah, it's such a good question. You know what, and I don't have like the answer to it, but
yeah.
what I've seen work is a couple of things. I think one, to just acknowledge that conflict is inevitable. I think that we often feel that when we're doing mission-driven work or purpose-driven work, that we're all going to be on the same page because we all care about the same things and we want the same outcomes. And that might be the case. I think that's true. That's why we like come together with like-minded people, because there is a shared purpose and a reason for that. But conflict comes up. It's either, conflict between people, it's power and privilege issues, it's,
Mm,
what's the right strategy here? It's who's got the mic all the time. So lots of reasons that conflict will arise, even in a space where you've got like common purpose. I think one thing I've seen often that can support that, and this also goes back to the framework, is the importance um, of setting and co-creating some community agreements.
mm,
And I think that we skip over that a lot, and I'm not talking about agreements like, you know, like take your bio break or whatever. It's not like meeting agreements, it's community agreements. And so it's, we often, in our trainings and workshops that we do, we offer a few different community agreements in any space, whether it's virtual or in real life. Like, we are comfortable with non-closure, or we're aware of our power and privilege, or we bring a spirit of abundance, even though we know that we are under-resourced in so many ways, right? So whatever that set of agreements are that work in a particular space, and I think it's important to have a few that are specifically around conflict. Like, we know that conflict will arise, and this is how we're going to deal with it when it happens. And we agree to that. We're going to take a pause. We're going to bring in a healer. And I think that's why the healer role is on the framework or the map, because often we bring in healers after like a conflict has exploded, to kind of fix things. And I think that it's important, especially if we're part of an ecosystem that's like very diverse and has people from different backgrounds and viewpoints, that like actually having the healer in the space from the start can
mm,
be useful, because they can, they can hold conflict, they can talk about it, they're not afraid of it, right? They have tools that, like, I'm not a healer, and so I don't have you both might be, right? I don't have
I don't know. Now I'm like,
We have our healer. We have
you
it.
grounded the space, so you do have some
Oh.
access to healing energy. And so, for those of us like me who are not, it can be hard to then be told, well, you have to mediate this conflict, right? Or you have to tend to conflict because you're part of like a leadership position or something like that. And I think it's a lot to place on folks to be able to do everything in a space where you're bringing lots of people together. So that's why, like, the role of the healer or the weaver, those kinds of roles can be super important in any spaces where conflict might arise.
Gotta keep on thinking we all have our wounded child. They're gonna come out and we're gonna have to take that pause. I love it. And thank you for recognizing the healing, space
I
that
know
Brain imparts.
when I was going through the roles, I was like checking off, some of them that I didn't check off healer though, but I did, I think guides and caregiver. I'm definitely caregiver, I
All
think.
that water.
Are connected. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a Cancer, so I think that's where it's like just innate, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to reach out to people. Um,
Virgo priestess stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like, what is that now?
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, that is really like useful information. Again, I think the idea of saying, let's have somebody who knows how to handle conflict resolution in the ecosystem from the beginning, like prior to conflicts, is is so important. That just feels like, well, yeah, like that makes
Totally.
that makes so much sense.
It's like the grounding moment. It's like it's knowing that that is there, and like
Yeah,
recognizing that that person, those roles, that those gifts need to be in our circles. Of course,
yeah,
they're fundamental to our ancestral ways.
yeah.
Ah, it's so beautiful. You have here, sustainability, and it's connected to what
My
we're talking
favorite
about
word.
now. I know. And then in particular, right, the things at hand, the work to bring a ceasefire, the work to recognize humanity,
To free Palestine.
to free Palestine, right? And the social, so much of that, and wanting to bring that to the table here, and like we actually need to do that.
Yeah, I think again, in this moment, right? And you have, I love that you're like, oh, there's the frontliners and there's the disruptors and they're the ones out there, you know, tearing stuff down, right? I mean, they're out there like really screaming and I think we've always been like, I don't know if that's our role. And also sometimes feeling maybe a little guilty about it, right? Like, oh, we're not the ones to be out there, but this is why this was so powerful for us to be like, oh, we do have a role in the ecosystem. It just looks different.
The reminder. Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I feel like even watching the energy levels from, October, November, December, and now we're in January, and you see kind of this like lull of energy because those things are not sustainable.
Mhm.
And so when we talk about sustainability, and I think you mentioned too, a need to like, how do we build even within the ecosystem, um because the disruptors can't disrupt all the time either, right? And the and the frontliners, so how do we build in rest or rejuvenation or renewal, those kinds of things?
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, it's so important to recognize that we don't have to always be playing particular roles in order to engage on the issues that we deeply care about. I think that when you're looking right now, over the past number of months, when it comes to the genocide in Gaza and the occupation, you see lots of different, as well as I should also mention the unprecedented backlash that you're seeing in the United States against
Yes.
Palestinian, Muslim, Arab, and Jewish communities.
Mhm.
The ways in which folks are responding really runs the gamut. I mean, of course, we are seeing disruptors, like Jewish Voices for Peace and others that are really shutting down like bridges and
Mhm.
freeways in order to get the attention of the American public. And you're also seeing visionaries like the US Campaign for Palestinian Rights uh,
Mhm.
that has been talking about the importance of the ceasefire and beyond that, right? Like laying out the
Mhm.
demands for the future. But you also have, and those are very visible ways to engage, but you also have so many others, right? There are caregivers who are supporting the disruptors and the frontline responders by making sure they have water and they know whom to call when they're arrested.
Mm.
You've got storytellers who are sharing like the various uh, histories that are untold of Palestinian Americans and progressive Jewish folks and solidarity practices. You're seeing builders who are writing ceasefire resolutions and introducing them in different um, legislatures around the country. And so,
Mm.
there are weavers who are making the connections between Black communities and why Black solidarity with Palestine has been is not a new thing, right? Has been around for a really long time, and making the connections as to why. So I think that all of these roles are being played, and while we might see the more visible ones, there are so many others that are happening that are part of this broader ecosystem that is striving for um, a liberated Palestine, that's striving for a ceasefire in Gaza, that's striving for the end to the backlash against affected communities here in the US. Um, but you make such a good point that um, the surge of activity, right, or that we often see, without like some level of infrastructure that is built by the builders and the experimenters, that it can actually get sapped because people get exhausted, and they don't know if they can show up for another rally or a protest, right? So there are a couple of ways to respond to that. One is like, is there another role that you can play, right? When you feel like you are sapped, is there another role that you can move into so you're not like leaving the ecosystem, because we need everybody, but
Mm.
another role that you can play, that you can step into, because we all have multiple skill sets. And I'm sure that when you look at the map, like you're like, oh, I play 8 out of 10 of those, right?
Yeah.
Um, so is there another one that you can play? Because it's a relay race and someone else has got the frontline responder role, right? And I trust that in my ecosystem, folks have got that. And I'm going to move into this other one for the time being so I can get my energy and strength back, and then whatever, right?
Mhm.
Um, so that's one way of responding to that kind of like sapped energy. But
Mhm.
another is that there needs to be infrastructure to like move folks along, who are just getting like energized or mobilized. So what are the structures that can be built and created? What's the scaffolding that
Mhm.
is required in order to like really capitalize on this energy? And if folks are interested in that, this is a little bit outside of the scope of our conversation, but at my organization, we, together with another group, Muslims for Just Futures, we just released a report called 100 Days of Building Power and Solidarity, which offers a lot of recommendations around
Mhm.
infrastructure that the movement needs to build in order to really make sure that folks who are energized now continue to be energized.
We'll get that link and make sure that we put it out there.
Yeah. I
The
mean, it's
chat.
such a, even in 2020 when we saw the surge of energy around Black Lives Matter, I just had an eye on like, all right, y'all, we need to make sure that we can, this is a marathon, not a sprint. We have to make sure, that we build in this infrastructure for it to be sustainable. And I feel the same way now, in that, this is, even if there is a ceasefire, it's really not going to end. It's just going to move into another stage of, of the movement, really, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it's like, so then how do we make sure again that we build this infrastructure so that we can continue to do that work?
Multi-generationally too,
Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's just, I think I just been very like with an eye on like, how do we make sure we create sustainable movements? How do we build infrastructure? Um, and then, yeah, I think, before we open it up for questions, it's funny how you said we look at the map and you're like, yeah, 8 out of 10. I feel like it is easy sometimes to be like, oh, well, I do that and that and that. What is your, I mean, what is your advice? Like, I think we don't want to be doing all 8 roles right at the same time.
Oh,
Um,
yeah,
how
that's
do
a
we
lot.
focus?
Just thinking of one of the
By
goddesses.
asking what the
Mhm.
ecosystem needs of you.
Oh, beautiful.
I
That's right.
mean, that's, like what is what are like the most directly affected communities asking for right now? How can I align my contribution and play a role that is responsive to what is being asked of us to do collectively and individually? I think that can answer like so when we decenter ourselves and uh, center more so on the ecosystem's needs or the community needs, I think that that answer gets a little bit clearer in different situations. And of course, we're balancing that, right, with our skill sets, our capacity. We don't want to say we're going to do something and not show up, right? So we want to balance our capacity, our skill sets, our lived experiences with what the needs are of the ecosystem. And then identify like the sharpest, most rigorous way of showing up in that moment that's going to be like, yes, this made a difference for, because I'm adding to the collective impact.
I think as Latinx and Latine people, we are kind of used to this, bringing out the part of ourselves that is needed. And I love that we have these skills. I love this question, like, what does the ecosystem need? And I just want to say, I love how articulate you are. I always love articulate, like, and you were so thoughtful in the way that you express and so accessible too. So in particular, I love the parts of this that is like your turn. Like, of course, of course, the approachability of that. So
Yeah. The precision, right? It's like, I mean, we're in academia, so we're used to reading books that say a lot of words that either don't mean anything or it's like, can you just say it in a simpler way, right? Or academics when they speak, who speak around things and are not like precise with their words.
I was just telling my students in the Tuesday class, if you haven't listened to it, I was like, academic writing is not the best writing. It's so redundant. You just repeat it again and again.
Yeah.
And as a Virgo, I love efficiency. And so there's something about it. And I'm like, maybe she's a Virgo, Renee. That's what I keep on thinking, No.
Not even close. But I love Virgos because they're wonderful builders.
Oh, there you go. Yes.
Among other things.
What's your sign? What's your sign?
I'm a Sagittarius sun and a Pisces moon and a Cancer rising.
So I'm Cancer sun, Cancer moon, Pisces rising.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Right. 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 Exactly.
Wow. So much empathy and care and connection and love. Wow. That's a lot. I hope you get a lot of that back.
I do. I love Virgos too because I surround myself with a lot of Virgos, like inadvertently. They give me containers to kind of be my watery self.
And we love taking the baton. We love the relay. I'm gonna take it. I'm gonna hand it back. Like,
that's a great, yeah. The structure and the boundaries are really wonderful characteristics of Virgos.
Yeah.
I have some more personal questions, but we don't want to get into that quite yet. We can open it up to.
Yeah. If there's anyone who has a question, you can either just unmute yourself, chime in, or if you want to type it in the chat, you can.
No pressure.
We would love to hear from y'all.
Yeah. What's coming up for you?
Like I see people like writing notes and
who's got some
doing stuff.
Big opinions, big thoughts.
Oh, Marina.
Hi. Yes. Hi. Thank you so much, first of all, for being here and for the opportunity. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation and to be learning from all of you. My question is around having conversations with youth. Sorry, I don't need to say hi once you hear my voice.
Always.
Specifically around working with youth and acknowledging like the power and the brilliance that exists in communities of young people who are excited and ready to dive into work. And I have the honor of working with high school students at a summer leadership camp, and the framework is something that we have been calling into our conversations and our teachings. And it's been incredible And something that we're wondering about and grappling with as we approach these conversations is how to have conversations about those central values that exist in a way that really meets those young people where they're at, and allows them to feel really like ready to be a part of the work.
Yeah. Thanks,
Mm.
Sabrina.
Yeah.
Really appreciate your question and also the work you do with young people. And I'm so glad that the framework has been useful. So as you kind of alluded to, there are like three components to this framework. There's our clarification and alignment around values, then there's the roles, and then understanding that we're part of this bigger ecosystem. So around values, I think that that's honestly the hardest part. And the thing that, again, we skip over a lot because we just have these assumptions that when we say words like equity or justice, that we're all kind of saying the same thing. And those words have just gotten so overused that they kind of are devoid of meaning sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it is so important to like actually talk about them, right? Before we embark on our projects and our campaigns and our causes, at every turn to say like, how does this reflect and embody the values that we care about, that we've explicitly identified, right? For young folks, I think that one like really practical exercise that I've seen, and this is not just with young folks. I mean, I've used this across the board, and it's actually I think it's in the book. Actually, I talk about it in some chapter. Is like a visioning exercise where folks are asked to come up with like a news headline that reflects some sort of win that they had in their community. And and it's a way to actually illustrate that. So, I often ask folks, like, give folks a bunch of magazines and they cut out like pictures that are connected to the values that are embedded in that headline. So if it's something like, students, win campaign to cancel student debt, something like that, right? What are the values behind that? So you have that headline, but then you actually engage students to ask, so what are the values that are important? What do the values look like in real life when they happen, right? So if maybe it's around financial abundance, maybe it's around a value around uh, uh, public care, right? Or community care. So like identifying those values and then actually like visually representing them in pictures, one's own illustrations, or in like a written paragraph that's like a news headline. And I've just found that when we get out of the space of like just using words, but using like other forms of art and creative expression, that values are a lot easier to embody and realize. So people, folks might draw like a neighborhood, they might draw, like a bank account, they might draw like the ability to then buy something or to contribute to their community, right? Because they aren't saddled with these debts. And so then the values become really clear. So that's just one exercise. And I do think it's in the book. I don't know where it is, but it's in the book. And I think I offer like the prompts that you could utilize even. So I hope that's helpful.
It is, thank you. And I love that because we're actually like in the woods for the camp. And something that's come up in over the years is that a lot of the students that we work with don't have the opportunity to be there, and like being able to tap into just like connecting to the nature and having your creativity and your heart be really filled by that, I think would tie really well to that activity. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Marina. Thanks for getting it going.
I love that.
So good.
Young people. I mean, because we work with young people, right, on the daily. I say we get older, but we just get a new batch of like 18 to 25-year-old every semester.
I started, yeah.
I think we went from like working with, younger millennials. Now we're into Gen Z. Now I think into younger Gen Z. And I just have so much faith and hope in our young people. I really, really do. I think a lot of people dismiss them for all kinds of reasons. And I'm just like, no, man, they're the future,
And they get it. Yeah. I think that young people are the visionaries.
Mhm.
in that framework most of the time, because
Mm,
they very clearly articulate and express a vision that isn't like restricted or
Uh,
bound with the scarcity approach that I think we get when we become adults.
yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I also appreciated your focus on like the non-written, the non like word, approaches. That's something that I have always turned to, and it's yeah, it has changed my
I'm like,
life.
that's your jam.
Yeah, it is.
And now I'm thinking,
Yeah.
because we do our work together, and we're supposed to be having a retreat soon. I'm like, let's talk about our values. Let's do a visioning exercise.
Yeah. Not
What is the Las Doctoras
Yeah.
ecosystem,
Ah,
Yeah.
beautiful.
I love it.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone else? Elisa. I was like, I know Salisa's gonna ask a question.
I am in full mothering right now, so I will be off camera. But I am so grateful. First off, thank you for being here. Thank you for this work. I have been slowly interacting and engaging with it, like letting the questions sit and doing all that. And so my question is, I'm really grateful for on 150 you're a friend in the long haul and just how to make it sustainable.
Oh my God,
My
thank you.
question is, and if I missed it somewhere in the book, is what are your thoughts? And I know you talk about community care and that we can't take on the role, all of the roles. Um,
Mm,
but what are your thoughts on rest and joy
Mm.
in this work as forms of resistance too? And like, is it okay to say, I need to put all of these down right now for the ecosystem for a bit before I can return to it? Like, is that allowed in this framework?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Salisa, and sending you a lot of ease as you mother.
mhm.
Um,
Oh,
yeah, I mean, rest and joy are critical to any sort of social change, work, or movement. And I think that, Black and Indigenous women especially have told us that for a very long time. Um, I think that, in these kinds of situations, it often feels like we are, at least I feel this way, and I think others do too at times, that we're like, that we shouldn't be taking a rest, that we shouldn't be talking about our fatigue or that our burnout or our overwhelm when there are so many things happening right in the world and around us that are so much more dire. And
Mhm.
so it feels like we're centering ourselves. It feels like we're like taking care of ourselves means that we're not actually tending to the trauma around us.
Mhm.
And I think that's a really valid reaction, a legitimate reaction that a lot of us have, especially when we're like purpose driven. At the same time, I think that, as you say, Salisa, like it's vital to put down the roles altogether at times.
mm,
Again, it comes back to a deep and abiding like relationship with self and the ability to explore the interiority of our lives, to be clear when it's too much, to recognize when we've taken it too far and where we might have other obligations, right, of caregiving or a crisis in our own personal lives, that we have to also like tend to. And so that kind of self-awareness and acknowledgement, I think is really important. Another thing that I talk about in that chapter is like recognizing when your cup is getting filled, right, to the brim. And again, that self-awareness. I mean, I think we all have these internal clocks or voices that will tell us um, if we're pushing too hard, and we have to, I think, listen as best as we can to that. And choosing to rest, choosing to take some time, choosing to do self-care in the ways that we need. And also being clear about that is the last part I'll say with our ecosystem, that we need to take a break or we need to um, to take rest, and that we will be back, right, when we've done that. So I think it's the self-awareness, acknowledgement to self, um, recognizing when we're getting to capacity, and also recognizing if we keep doing that, right? Like sometimes that is a pattern that like we push ourselves really hard, and then we burn out, and then we rest, we go again. And that's not always good for our nervous system either, to kind of be in that jerky push-pull motion all the time. So I think a lot of this is about a lot of I think the sustainability pieces are like those internal cues and clues that enable us to understand when we have taken it a little too far, and to stop before we get to that point, right? And that's good for us in every aspect of our lives, not just around doing this work, but in terms of how we interact with, our friends and our family and our neighbors and our colleagues and the like too. Joy is vital. And for me, I learned a lot of that in terms of understanding the importance of Black joy in movements of Black liberation, where it's clear how important it is to connect with others, to make sure that we're laughing and dancing and sharing and creating and right, finding those moments, because we can't constantly be in this space of anguish. The world is heartbreaking, and there is only so much heartbreak we can constantly hold. So we do need to find ways to release and to surrender and to rest, to find joy in every single day in different ways, right? I think all of that builds our sustenance in order to keep going.
I love it. I feel like, when you talk about the ecosystem, and I think you mentioned like the idea of trust, like we got to trust that everybody's playing their role, so then we can play our role, right? We don't have to play all the roles. But I think even when we talk about rest, it's like that's why there's an ecosystem, so that if we need rest, the whole thing doesn't fall apart, right? That there's still work going to be done while we, get to rest. I think I was really trying to give myself that kind of permission, again, at partly because, just by nature of what we do, we're always doing work. But then in moments of crisis, I tend to be one that likes to like, let me pause, let me, get myself oriented to like what's happening, where am I best suited to be, and trust that those who are stepping up in the urgency are doing the work that needs to be done now, so that I can be ready when like the next wave of energy that needs to come up. But it hasn't always been that way. Like I've been sometimes like, oh, maybe I need to go now, and I'm like, no, it's okay, we have an ecosystem, right? It's okay, because we can rely on others, right?
I think this conversation comes, I think, at a moment when there is this like the wave, and I hope with this we are bringing this new energy, collective ecosystem to the work.
Yeah, and the revolution needs to be fun. I had so I have my doctorate is in ethnic studies, and I had a professor who talked about that, like, the revolution can be fun, like we have to, like, because then what are we fighting for, right? If we're not, enjoying our lives and building joy.
We're going dancing tomorrow. First time in a long time.
Yeah.
So we're gonna
That's why we looked at each other like, yes, we need to laugh and dance. Because after, months of yeah.
And thank you, Salisa, for asking that question. And thank you for, your response with that self-awareness and pattern recognition is so important. I feel that too. I loved that point. Thank you, Deepa.
Yeah. I think we have time for maybe one more question, if anyone's really wanting to get their question in.
I have one, but I don't want to ask it of someone else. Please.
This is where, like, I'm not good with silences. As a professor, I'll just keep talking. So I'm like,
I see Marina has, yes.
Yeah, I don't want to ask another one if anyone else wants to ask one though, because I did already ask a question.
I think you have
You're
permission to go.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So I work in an elementary school during the year, and I had brought up having conversations about the social change ecosystem with the staff who work there, because
Ooh.
in the years that I've been there, we've encountered some um, tension
I was
when
like, you don't have to
having
say it. We know.
when having conversations about like the urgency of really engaging with intention and social change work. And I'm wondering how you would recommend like having conversations that really call people into tapping into the roles that they play, and feeling open to making connections from um, the work and the work that we do in education and the possibilities that exist within the classroom, um, and the social changes that are demanding to be made in our world.
That's a great
Yeah.
question. And I love the way that you're trying to bring these conversations into every space, you know. And oftentimes that is the first ecosystem to start with, the one that we are closest to, where we work. So I would say a couple of things. I think that, you know, this is a pretty easy point of entry for most folks because it doesn't it's really self-directed, right? Like where you see yourself, how you map yourself, what you aspire to play the role of and the like. So I think that if it's something that can be used as like an icebreaker or as an exercise at a staff retreat or a professional development day, you know, it can be useful because we do work actually like I've done a lot of trainings and workshops for educators at all levels. And part of it is this conversation around how educators are playing, especially like teachers or school administrators are playing so many of these roles in a given moment. They're guides to their students. They're also frontline responders and they're caregivers. And a lot of those roles are they sap a lot of energy and they take a lot out of the person. So it could be an exercise that introduces folks to this framework and allows them to kind of map themselves and to understand what the ecosystem looks like at the department or the school. You know, are we like too many builders and not enough visionaries? You know, those kinds of realizations often come about when you're mapping like a group of people. So I would first, try to see if it can be introduced, not as like, oh, we need to work on these issues, but more so like a skills building tool. A self-awareness tool, right? A mapping tool. Because once we do that, and I would also, if it's an ecosystem that's a little bit resistant, I wouldn't necessarily start with the roles. The values. I would kind of just say, well, these are our stated values, and then move into the roles, because I think that's where the values piece, as we talked about earlier, it's so foundational and it can trip people up. So if it's more of a resistance space, I would kind of move into the discussion on roles first. And then it's also a great tool for students and young people. So, there are a couple of examples that I've shared on social media about how this has been a tool for young people to learn about, say, the civil rights movement, and recognizing that there was an ecosystem of work behind it, and not just like the charismatic visionaries that we all admire, but that there were a lot of other folks, right, behind like the March to Selma or the boycotts. So it can be used in a way to learn in that sense. And then lastly, I should say that for those of you who have young kids in your lives, I have a children's picture book coming out in the fall of this year on this framework. Yeah, because a lot of teachers reached out to me and parents to say that they were like using it in their classrooms to talk to like even kindergartners. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. And they sent me all these like pictures of the kids were drawing of like frontline responder and, in their community. So it just inspired me to, So it's called We Are the Builders, and it'll come out in September of this year. So please keep a lookout. So that's another option to get it into your library, into your school library.
We need that book. I need it.
That's always such a thing for us is how do we bring our kids, into this work?
Yeah.
Um, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the constant thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that is so great.
I
About
love it.
getting some like language and vocabulary and
Yeah.
seeing oneself, right? That can actually be a huge opening, I think, for folks. And I think that's why this framework has resonated. Like I never thought that it would be used or that folks would connect to it beyond like my small nonprofit world. And it's been great to see that. And I think the only reason is because I think that folks see themselves in it. So whenever we see ourselves in something, right, mirroring back, like, oh yeah, that's what I am. That's how I
Mhm.
that's what I want to do. It is a sense of self-empowerment. And then when
Yes.
connecting that to like how do we then, use that to empower our ecosystem as a whole? It just makes it so much bigger and more profound.
It's funny. I was thinking of I don't know how many years ago now, but we read Channy's book as in our book club, and I'm like, this would be such a good these would be good books to read side by side because I feel like Channy's book
Know you.
felt empowering in that way. Like, what does it mean to be a
Yeah.
Cancer and lean into those strengths, and
Mhm.
then like, okay, now that we know our strengths, how does this play into our social change ecosystem? Like, because I think prior to really understanding my astrology, I was resistant to even my own gifts. I was like, no, I'm not a sensitive person. And then once I allowed myself to be sensitive, I was like, okay, this is the role that I play, and I don't have to do all those other things because this is what I'm
Yeah.
good at.
Gotcha.
Yeah, the
So I was just
uncanny
thinking that.
alignment of this framework and folks who are into astrology has like one of the most like um you know, a revelation that has been so beyond the pale for me, but also so welcome because I am totally into astrology myself. And
We
I'm
get a
sure,
lot of resistance about it. The
oh,
meeting
really?
point of activism and astrology
No,
and academia.
academia.
I know all three. I mean, honestly,
Yeah.
we walk these lines and
But for us, it's helped us make so much sense of our own lives
grace,
that
knowledge.
and
Yeah.
again, that's why I was drawn to this because it was like, oh, this it kind of gave a language to what we kind of felt,
Mhm.
Yeah.
but weren't sure if like that was okay,
Mhm.
right? And so it was like, oh yeah, we have permission to not do everything and to focus on the things that we are good at and the roles that we can play in our community within our capacity, right? Within all of that. And so we don't have to do everything. That's what I was like, oh, I don't have to do everything. I'm good.
Joy, time. Deep gratitude, Deepa, for your time here today with us, for sharing with our community. Thank you so much for coming
Thank
and
you
being a part
so,
of
so
this
much.
time.
Yeah, we appreciate it. If you want to mention website, anything where
Yeah,
people can
sure.
contact you.
Well, first, thank you so much for having me, and it's been a pleasure to be here. I would love to know what you think of the book as you move through it, and if you find other places that can benefit from it, feel free to reach out to me too. We do a lot of trainings and workshops on this framework to different organizations and networks, so happy to connect around that.
You come to
So
campus, you'll come to my class.
yes, I do drop in sometimes. Camp is like, especially if you're using the book, then absolutely would love to. That's one of my favorite things to drop into classrooms. Uh, I was going to say that if you want more information on the framework, it's socialchangemap.com. And if you are interested in seeing some of that content on the map, but also other things related to social movements. I tend to post on Instagram. It's at Deepa V. Iyer. I'm more of a weaver on Instagram and a disruptor on X. So
Oh,
I love the distinction.
I love
at
that.
DV Iyer. So yeah, I would yeah, I would welcome, connecting, and please feel free to reach out. You know how to reach me.
Yeah, we'll
Thank
share
you.
that too.
Thank you
Thank you.
so much. We appreciate it. Again, to our participants, we can say bye to Deepa and we can
Debrief
debrief. Yes.
together. Thank
All
you,
right.
Deepa. Thank you again.
Take care. Bye.
Adios.
Bye.